exhilarating if somebody could read the story without my telling it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm of two minds on that. When a story is easy to read, it's a Marlboro advertisement.
I say it again, I'm hard.
It's a Marlboro advertisement, a cigarette advertisement.
Okay.
When it's too easy to read, it's like, okay, if I smoke that cigarette, I'm gonna be glamorous, famous, and I'm gonna have a real nice suit. But I like what you're leaving unsaid in it.
It was because I didn't know how to say it.
No, you did. You did too.
Thank you.
Because what you've got here is something that makes me want to stand in front of it. It makes me want to look at it and go, because I can see, just offhand, I can see decades and decades and centuries now of art history coming out of it. So for me, I study a lot of art history, and what thrills me in work is when I see art history as a river. It flows. And when I see things that speak to me of people learning from that river and people expressing themselves in ways that flow a little inlet back into that main flow, this has so much of art history in it that I don't want to know the story. I want to know why, when I look at this, it makes me emotional. It makes my chest feel bigger. Maybe that's the field that you are trying to represent, but it makes me feel like I can breathe easier. And that's important. That's very, very important, because my story in my paintings, I almost never tell anybody the truth of what my story is, because I don't want to get in the way of their experience. And when I look at this, I know, obviously, and you've represented them in such a way that I have a pretty good idea that they're either doves, pigeons, or partridges, you know? Because there's so much movement that I don't know whether you're teasing me into thinking that it's one thing when it's actually another, or whether you're being direct, but I don't care, because I keep going back into my experience of art and how the colors that you've used say so much about the artist. And I could have this hanging on my wall, and every day I would see something different, and I would get a different experience and a different feeling. And when a painting is that open to interpretation, that is a major success as a painter, as an artist, because then you've given something to your viewers where they can go back. And one day my chest feels tight, and one day my chest feels like I'm breathing. You know the smell in the fall when the meadows start to die and you can smell that molasses in the air? I get that. Mm. I get that from this painting. And if I knew your real, true story, I might keep going, well, it's about pigeons and they do a murmuration, which is what those groupings of birds are called. And I really love it. But for anybody else, you know, we want to know what you're thinking, because it helps us as artists to know that when you think something, when you paint it, it's your story. But you're giving that art to someone else to trigger their story through your eyes. And this is a wonderful, wonderful example of how to engage viewers. Your composition is solid. Your color composition keeps us moving around the canvas and never makes us want to leave the canvas. You don't have sloopy lines that are unnecessary and inarticulate. It looks like everything you've done here has a purpose, a reason, and a meaning. And I can spend years every day going in and getting a little something different. Some days I'll see it as an abstract painting, purely abstraction. Some days I'll see it as a more expressionist painting, which is what it is. Some days I'll see it as a more realist painting. But it's a very emotional painting. You were very, very honest in painting this. And I would disagree that you've overworked it. I find this to be compelling and attractive in an intellectual, emotional way. And I think that's terribly well advanced and admirable.
I thank you for that. I don't know whether I put all that there. I don't know.
Nobody else did.
But you made me go there.
Okay.
And that's what
I'm glad
matters.
you've got the tools to get there.
I spend my days talking about art, whether I'm chewing myself out about mine, or whether I'm talking to my students about theirs, or whether I'm in a museum talking to myself about what I'm seeing. I spend my time articulating things about art. So what you meant is what it meant to you. But what you did as an artist who takes thoughts and turns them into pieces of color on a substrate opens up doors in me that I had no idea I would be thinking about today. But even now I'm sitting here, and as I'm talking to you, I'm smelling that hay. I'm smelling the weeds as they're beginning to die in September. You know, it's still a little warm, the breeze is a little slower, but that smell from the meadow it's like somebody has sprayed molasses in the air to me, and I'm still getting that out of this.
And are you smelling it?
Yes.
Well, nobody may see what I see.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I was saying about the Marlboro advertisement.
Yeah, I didn't
They
smoke,
are
so I
very-
didn't get that.
Yes, but they spend fortunes making sure that you get exactly what they want you to get. You smoke this cigarette and you're going to be successful and well dressed and probably smell great. You know, because that's it. That's all they put it in there for. And this is the polar opposite, where you're saying to Bill or to Dell or to any of us, come here, look at this, and how do you feel when you look at it? And that's one of the most wonderful things about art.
And can we make it better?
Gosh. To me, I would be so protective of this as a painter that I would sit on it for a decade before I did anything to it.
It was my
Because
inclination that I had finished.
I think your inclination is spot on, because I can't see anything that it needs. It has everything that it needs. And even the negative space up here, where you very subtle, you know, I was talking to Dell about using very, very subtle white color that will only have a temperature change, but to the viewer it'll look white. Well, you've gone just a hair further, where you you've given us color up here, but even that has some mist and movement.
In watercolor, you gotta keep it there,
Mhm.
or else it's gone.
Yes, it's terribly difficult to paint in
Yeah, I did
watercolors.
work on that.
Well, I think you worked on it extremely well.
And, can I end the story? The orange in the very center or below the big bird, that orange there, before I overdid it a little bit, it was a puffed up red bra. I had to work on
I
it.
got you. Well, it's not now. And I like the fact that you worked in a little bit of green into it, but not so much that it became too dirty. You know, because it's so dangerous when you start mixing those colors, especially with watercolor. But what you did was you just turned down the red, you know, a few degrees and allowed the yellow that's in it to come out, and then the green sort of balanced it so that it didn't look trite. It looked sophisticated and advanced. I don't think it's overworked.
Thank you.
But you're welcome to think it's overworked if you like.
I won't touch it anymore.
I love it.
Jamie?
I thought it should
Really?
go.
Yeah, really.
I did too. The first thing I thought was, my gosh, it's a Mark Chagall.
Oh,
Can I
well, I
get
thought
disclaimers
Picasso
on
had
the way
used
out?
it too.
Yeah.
Well, somebody did. Thank you so
Nice
much.
marriage.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Jane?
Can I start with the exclaimers now? I'm not deep at all. I live in my head all the time, so it seems as if I have to be. I don't know. So this one's old. These are both old that are back. There was one. I've had no training in anything, and I only know how to do it first. And I'll shut up because I'll go on forever.
Well, let me tell you something. Michael knows my painting teacher, who's deceased now. Flames probably shot up out of the ground when they opened his grave. He was atempestuous, and when I went to Virginia Commonwealth, everything was about ideas and expression. And I went to him one day and said, I literally don't know how to paint. You know, how do I put paint on a brush? How do I move it on the canvas? How do I get it to do what I want it to do? And he was kind of big, and he was kind of a Hemingway kind of character, you know, goddamn, I don't know. And I won't quote him directly, I'll soften one word, but he leaned in and he said, if you want to know crap like that, you go look it up in a book. And so I did, and I've never been taught how to paint. I've been taught how to think about painting, which I'm very grateful for, and it was a great program because it toughened me up. So if somebody, you know, like we talked about, if they hate my work, it's cool with me. But everything I paint is because I fumbled around until I knew how to do it. Nobody taught me how to paint. And if nobody taught you how to paint, you did a damn good job of teaching yourself how to paint. Because first and foremost, I have the lid on, thank heaven. First and foremost, these are in acrylics, right?
Yeah.
Well, acrylics are cruel. They're very, very difficult, and they're very demanding. And to me, I have a hierarchy of painting that goes in reverse. And oil painting is at the bottom. The hardest in my lexicon is watercolor. Watercolor is cruel and hard and harsh and unforgiving. And right next to that is acrylics, because they're so highly transparent and they dry so quickly. And once you put it down, it's very hard to unput it. Where with oils, you know, I was drawing lines all over yesterday and scribbling around with stuff. And, you know, you could bury a whole village with oil paints. But with acrylics, it takes a deft touch and a clear eye. And I really love what you're doing. The transitions of the wood of the violin are very subtle and nicely done. And I would, if you know, I had just walked up, I would have assumed that it was done in oil, because you're taking advantage of transparency and over brush, dry brush, all those things in such a deft way that you end up with, I hope, exactly what you're looking for.
That's what I try to see,
Yeah.
do what I see. I'm not really deep. I'm like, oh, I'd like to just, I want to be able to pick it up. That's what I want to do.
And that's fine. And I'm going to argue with you about not being deep, because I think, again, with these, there's a subtext that's involved in both of them. And, you know, we're real accustomed to seeing the huge waves crashing on the rocky shore, and you know, we think of Shakespeare and the Tempest and all that stuff. And here, you've given us kind of one of those unusual days that we sometimes, I'm saying we, so I'm back home, but those unusual days that we have sometimes, and it may be in the spring, it may be in the middle of the summer, it may be in autumn, maybe in winter, but I don't get that impression, because to me, I remember days like this when I was hanging out on the water and the sky would go from buttermilk to overcast, but they weren't clouds, it was just so much moisture in the air that everything turned white in the sky. And you haven't given us that booming drama that's going on here. It's much more subtle. And it leaves me to want to be in that place at that time so that I could rest and relax and smell the water and think about not thinking about whatever was bothering me. It's a sanctuary painting for me. And everything you've done is subtled down. You haven't overstated anything to make sure that we know this is rock number 1, this is rock number 2, so on and so forth. There's a homogeneity to what's going on there that's not trivial, and it's not shorthand, it's subtlety. And that's very, very difficult in any kind of art, but especially when you're working in acrylics. And the color where you've taken advantage of some aerial perspective to put some of that moisture that I was talking about back up into the air and let these fall back, and then clarify these without going overboard and saying, now everybody knows that pine trees are green, but they have a blackness to them, so I've got some really dramatic green in here. You've held yourself back in a very adept way in both of these paintings. It's really, really difficult, and you may not, since you did it, you may not understand how difficult it is to paint any kind of printed paper, whether it's text in a book or whether it's music. It's extremely difficult. I had the privilege in Fort Worth, we have 2 Stradivari in our symphony orchestra. and they were having a fundraiser, and one of the joys of being an artist is being able to support charities with our work. And so I've been able to make some substantial contributions that I just did on my easel. But I got to paint these two Stradivari, and they had two guards. Each Stradivari is only allowed to be touched by the musician who plays that Stradivari in the orchestra. And so they allowed me to get within a foot of them as long as I sat on my haunches with my hands behind my back and leaned over. Okay, that's the story. But my first impulse was, I'm going to put a piece of music in there that are particularly beautiful on the violin. And I couldn't do it. I just couldn't pull it off. Because I've got this romantic, sentimental thing that I do in my work, and it just kept getting in the way, and it looked horrible. And yours looks exactly like I would expect a piece of music to look. So here you've got a double winner because of your mastery of acrylics. And you may think that you just paint stuff, but I look at it and just like before, I start going into my head and my story, and also as an artist, I look at things and I go, I'm a little jealous of that. Okay? So, and I thought about talking to you last night. I couldn't sleep well, and I was thinking about, I had looked at your work.
She has an effect on me too.
You're going next.
But I was thinking about your work and the still lifes, and I thought, that it's really important that kind of work is done. But I also, and that's why I'm so glad to see these, because I thought she really needs to be talking about every day. Just every day. Not major social movement issues and things like that. There are plenty of us who are going to carp and growl in our paintings and then hide it with pretty color so I can get you to look at it long enough. But we also need to have places in art, like the field, like the music, like this, that's so special to me, because when I lived here, I lived on the water or in the woods. That's where I live. And it gives me solace and peace. And it may not seem important to you, but I hope you begin to realize how important what you do is for those of us who need to see what you saw.
Well, that means a lot. I mean, I'm a Pisces, so I'm out there. I'm always in dream world. I can drive 4 hours without the radio or anything.
Sure.
So it's
Come here,
almost
Pisces. Come here.
But I got so much going on in here. It's almost like I have to paint real.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, I understand.
does that make sense?
Yes.
And it's like, so, but this one was definitely, when I was painting it, it was a feeling of, well, it was one of those days where you're kind of lonesome in my face.
Yes,
So, and
yes.
I was hoping, I wasn't doing it for anybody except for me.
And
That's what most of them are, just for me.
good, and I strongly encourage that, because if you're painting for somebody else, you're painting a failure.
Right.
Because here's the way I look at it. I break it down into thirds. A third of the people who experience my work, I could spit on the canvas and they would love it. I just love what you do. And sometimes that's how they say it in Fort Worth. I just love what you do. But a third of them they don't care what I do, they're just gonna love it because J.T. Grant did it and they have heard of me. A third of them are gonna go, And a third of them, I could paint, I could have Jesus himself sit in my studio for a portrait and they'd hate it. You know, it doesn't matter what I do, they hate it. And yet, there's flux. You know, sometimes somebody moves to the don't care, sometimes somebody moves from the hate to the don't care, and so on and so forth. And if I try to paint for any of them, I'm doomed. Because I'm going to get into this failure loop where I'm chasing ghosts. So always, what you're doing is exactly what every artist should do, is just paint what you need to have painted for yourself, and your audience will find you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That bottom painting is a good example of the finish. If it wasn't for those little splashes, that little spot down there, it would be a whole different painting.
And that's a good point.
What little spot? Point.
Little splashes.
Yeah, little splashes of foam.
Splashes of water.
Uh-huh.
Right down here.
That could be a whole different paint right
That
there.
water is beautiful too.
That could be like a cave.
Yeah.
Even the calm water is very
Yeah, you
beautiful.
wouldn't get your eye wouldn't go down there at all. It would kind of
Uh-huh.
just sit at the top.
That's what
And
you
it gives
see.
a little bit of movement, and like JT said, it's not this big splash, this big wave, this dramatic thing. It's just this little thing on the shore, and it was done just right.
It was. And that's something that I wanted to mention while I was here, just as an aside. We had a show at the Kimball Museum in Fort Worth of Frederick Church paintings. And one of my students asked me if he bribed me with food, if I would walk through the show with him and, you know, tell him what I saw was going on. And we walked into the room and there was a huge painting. I guess it was, you know, about 4 feet wide and 5.5 feet tall. And it was Niagara Falls. And it was a beautiful, beautiful painting. And one of the ways I look at paintings, whether they're mine or somebody else's, is, you know, I'll do that I'm crushing your head thing, or reformat it, or block out things to see what it does to the rest of the painting. Well, there's this beautiful painting from down in the gorge of the falls, and it's mist. And you can, there are these very, very subtle transitions of prismatic color in it. And I was looking at it and I was thinking, why does this work? Because there's nothing there. And on this scale, right about here, there was a dead tree sticking out of a rock. And all that was left was a little arc that went down and a little branch that went up and another one that went out. And he had painted it almost black. And I blocked it out and the painting went to poop. And it just fell apart and it looked like this horrible marshmallow cream thing with a little bit of food color in it. And I've always liked church. You know, I love Church's paintings. But that painting really convinced me of what a genius he was, because he never overstated what was going on in the mist. And when that tree was blocked out, there was no movement, it was static, but you uncovered that tree and you could tell that there was water falling and mist rising and each was obscuring the other. It was brilliant. And it's those little things that, you know, you can take the most subtle, vaporous expression and stick some little point of focus in it, that changes the focus of everything in it. And that's why that was the first thing I pointed out, was because you didn't take the cheap shot. It speaks to what you were talking about. It's a little lonely, it's a little melancholy, and that's why I spent time down there, was because I think too much. And it was a place for me to go and just smell the water, and even, when low tide comes and the marsh stinks,
Right.
I miss that smell so much. But really, really nice, and I'm so glad you brought them in.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
I
very
appreciate
much.
I think it's interesting when you go to a museum or a gallery, you know artists that are looking at things, because they're up there real close. If you look at the side of the painting, it's
Yes.
see how it's done.
Okay.
Well, see.
Ah. Let's see, this one? Yeah, that one there.
Okay, all right.
Very, very, very.
Okay, we'll see what happens.
Okay, let me have just a minute.
Yeah.
Are these new?
Well, here's the thing. After about 40 years or so, I started coming down here and painting with Dell again, trying to get back into it. So the one with the bird on the boat, on the rope, I was at on a friend's boat, and I saw that bird. I have the photograph on the back taped to the back of that. The turtle was in my yard, and I took a picture of it. Started working from that, and then I have this one here with the female that, I don't know, I guess I was just having a chaotic day, and that canvas has actually been up in the attic for I don't know how long. I finally took the plastic off, and of course it had rotted the edges, so I said I'm just gonna paint.
Good.
Nothing in mind, just paint. I started out to just put her eyes in and maybe throw some, transparent paint over it to have the eyes looking through, but I ended up painting into it and painting into it again, and I probably will continue trying to paint into it still.
And remind me, are these acrylics?
They're acrylic, yes.
Oh.
Yeah, they're acrylic.
Bless you and all who sail upon you. I've already said what I feel about acrylics.
Okay.
Frightened.
That's all right.
As a painter, I just can't work with them. Your eye for light is wonderful. You are able to capture the effect of light on color and the effect of color on light in a very advanced way. And these are not simple color arrangements. Those are pretty subtle and complicated in how they react with each other to give. I don't know whether that's a shadow.
I think it was a shadow, yes.
Yeah, and I assumed it was a shadow, but this is sort of what I was talking about with the Frederick Church. This really strong statement of dark sets up the intensity of light. However, the colors that you've chosen all support that intensity of light, which is very tricky. It's really hard to do. People forget that shadow is not a thing. Shadow is the absence of the direct light. However, it becomes the statement of the reflected and ambient light, which is why the standard thing is if you're painting a landscape and you want to paint a shadow, make sure you put blue in it. Well, that's because if it's a bright sunny day that's casting a strong shadow everything is lit by the sun except that place, which is in shadow. But that is lit by the vault of the sky, which is why there's blue in it. And so in here, you've implied that there's something else out here that has light on it, that is influencing the color of that shadow, and yet all of them work very, very nicely as statements of bright light in and of themselves that are then made even more intense. Because I know that feeling of you know, kind of blinking because there's so much light around, and that's what this feels like. And the same is true down here with the tortoise, where you've very adeptly altered the shape of the tortoiseshell pattern as it rolls away from us, and then put in this sort of neutral gray light for where the light's really hitting it, rather than just resorting to plain white, bright white. It leaves everything that would be visible there, visible. And again, like I was talking to Jamie about, is settling into what you want to say. And I think the only thing I would suggest, and is this still in process, or is this one of your finished things?
No, I can say it's still in process. I mean, I just pull it out every now and then and
Good,
add something to
good.
it.
Because one of the tragic mistakes that people make is they think thing and background. And background is like something from Olin Mills, you know, the old things they'd roll down, and it was like that colored piece of construction paper we all fought over in elementary school. The ground is at least equal to the positive space. You know, the ground is considered negative space, the object is considered positive space, but give as much attention to this, and I'm not talking about painting individual blades of grass necessarily, but give as much attention to the ground and creating the sense of all over importance in the toss away that you've given to the tortoise, because it really deserves kind of a tour de force feel to it. And that's what the challenge you've set yourself there is that this is a tour de force painting. And so you want everything in the painting supporting that damn feeling that people get, because you've clearly got it with the tortoise. I mean, that's damn. And you want what's going on in the ground around it not to overwhelm it. You know, you don't want to turn it into the Amazon. But at the same time, you want to make sure that it is supporting this wonderful painting of this innocent creature that just happened to be where you are. You know, you're sharing the same space with it. And that's what I would suggest here too, is continue studying those photographs and other photographs of terns or whatever kind of bird that is, so that you can get a little more of a feel like that there.
Right.
Because you've done it so well here that this needs to have a little bit of meat on the side of it that may be just temperature changes within the dark that you've created. And it may be the addition of light, and are probably going to be, you know, related to these sky colors that you've got. This, I assume, is sky and not an adjacent boat.
Well, it was kind of like the boat was there, but the shadow was, the sun was coming down on it. So
Well,
it's like
I know
another
that.
part of the boat, but yeah,
Is this another part of the boat?
yeah, I just.
Okay, good, well, fine. Then this is going to be the color of the reflections on that. However, since this is so dark, you may want to put just a little bit more color, not match that, but put a little bit more color that that's made of on it. Because a dark here will read as a white here. So you work a little bit more color into it, and you can get away, since it's a brightly lit day, you can take advantage of the vault of the sky and use blues as well as those colors. And I would probably even lean toward, if you'll pardon the expression, a pretty blue, a sky blue in some of those reflections, because that doesn't appear anywhere in the painting, and yet it implies what has given you such beautiful light in the painting. And this one, it is what it is. It's something that you've started, it's something that you're contemplating, and I think once you get the layers of paint on it that you've got on that, you're going to have a moment where you kind of go, okay. And then you're going to start doing things that may seem counterintuitive, may seem like the wrong color, but you're going, I don't know why, but I just know that that's the color I got to put there. And so I always like for my paintings to tell me what to do rather than me telling my paintings what to do. And you obviously do that. You know, you look at them and you study them, and I can see that you spend time away from them, so that you get a chance to go, okay, I need to do this. And that's what's going to happen with this one. So clearly you've got, you got the chops. And this one is going to fit into those as you spend time working on it.
That's great.
I think they're really, really, this one I'm really fond of. That one I'm impressed by. Thank you for bringing them in.
Is that acrylic?
Yes.
Yes, it's acrylic.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think one of the differences is that one isn't from an image or a photograph.
No, it isn't.
So
No,
we've got,
Yeah,
I was just,
it's all in your head, which is good.
yeah,
yeah.
I'm saying it's a different way to paint. than-
Yeah, and
Yeah.
some of the best ways to practice, because then you're really left alone.
and since the canvas was damaged, I figured I would just do that.
Well,
Because I hadn't really expected to have it to sell or anything like that. But just to, as you can see, the canvas is rotting around the edges and like that. So I just thought, well, I'll just paint something on it. Why waste a canvas? But,
And he's a Pisces. He's all in his head.
Not a one of us, another weirdo, huh? I can say that to
see on
them.
the back, I've got the,
any other Geminis in the room?
on that one.
We all, you never know who you're meeting.
Okay, ladies, tell me who's next.
Huh?
Who's next?
Thank you very much.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Hot dogs. Jazz on that. Okay, be careful with what's not back there.
That's not going to hurt.
I think let's put these here. Pick that one up. Move that. There, and then you can put one of those. Okay, little quick brief.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm a water baby too. I'm not a Pisces. I'm a Cancer, so I paint with my emotions.
Yeah,
I knew that.
So most of my paintings, I paint with a palette knife. My daytime job is really structured and controlled. So when I come home, I like to let loose. So if I'm mad, I'm picking up a knife and I'm taking it out on the canvas. The one on the upper left, I was painting with a straw and I was just blew the paint around. And then, you know, sometimes I use Q-tips. So the two bigger pieces was both when I was in love. So the one on the left is Lady in Love and the one on the right is Man in Love. You can kind of see the WB top hat with the guy. And the three smaller pieces I made when I was laid off from my job. So that's where kind of the sharp lines came from. I was upset.
So when you do these, how do you like to start? Nothing, from nothing but the canvas.
Yes, I don't like to think when I come home. So it's all about what I'm feeling right now. I don't have a palette set out. Everything is unconventional.
Mhm. Well, just right off the bat, my two favorites are Woman in Love and what was this one?
Oh, that's Metallic Madness. I was so bad when
Metallic
I got
Madness. Yeah. Well, and I think here you're painting self, here you're painting self, and here you're painting perception. You know, it's him. And what I would hope is that you take it out of any kind of thought that he might have and make it strictly and exclusively the pure emotion that you have. Because what I see here is what you're talking about. You know, you have one place in your life where it's all pent up emotion, and then you have another place in life where it's safe to unpin the emotion and let it run. And this one is more controlled because I suspect you're trying to say something particular about him. And here, you're just going,
Lady in Love.
that place is not me. This place is me because of that place and who I am here. Because I see this quiet, gentle, genteel lady, and then this comes out of her, and it has an honesty and an authority and a sense of self-possessed, proud ownership of self, that no matter what happens in that other place, I maintain my place. And that's what goes on there, and that's what goes on there. And then here, it's almost like you're talking in his voice. You know, to say, he likes this, and he thinks that, and this is his job, and this is his personality, rather than you. And I would love to see you go back into this and make it strictly a matter of self-ownership about him as it is part of you. Because these are so beautifully expressive. I mean, this, you know, I knew from sitting on the side that this is a woman. I got it. This is a woman. And this is ticked off.
Yes.
And I get that. This is kind of like doing a few deep breathing exercises, getting yourself back to a calm place. So I would do one or two of those, just to blow the carbon out of the pipes and then go back into that one. When you've affirmed yourself, you've reset yourself, and you're able to go into some deep truth. Because this is very complicated. You know, a person who doesn't look at a lot of art may go, But if you respect art, and if you want to think about what's behind art instead of what's on top of the canvas, this is complicated. This is a very complicated painting with a 1, 2, 3, 4 color palette. And the smaller your palette, the more complicated it is to communicate. And so that's a great achievement on your part to be able to take limited palette and have sort of an unlimited dialogue take place on the canvas. And these jagged lines that come into it are, even when you're in your quiet place, there's still a reality that goes on in the rest of your life that intrudes on that stillness and that process that you've gifted yourself with of clearing out and emptying. And I think you can clear out and empty and then take out the beautiful trash, if you know what I mean. You can get the junk out of the way, and I'm not saying this painting is junk. I'm saying do deep breathing exercises, because that's what they're for. And this is a deep breathing exercise in paint that gives you a chance to go deep down inside and speak about foundational issues and personalities. And this strength of personality needs to be applied to this, because you cannot paint another person's reality. You know, I walk up to people that I think would make a good painting. And when I lived in Richmond, it was a highly successful method. I would have a business card, I'd hand them my business card, and I'd say, I think you would be really good in one of my paintings. Would you consider doing it? And almost always they would say yes. And I said, well, as soon as it's convenient, give me a call. And they'd call me up. And I'd put them in a painting. And then I moved to Texas, famous for chainsaw murders. and I would hand people a card when I first moved there and say, my name is so-and-so and I'm an artist, and would you, and they would start backing up and get angry. And I learned within 7 days. I tried twice, and that was it. Never did it again.
Why did they get angry? I mean, what's the difference?
Well, there's just a different perception of femininity, masculinity, identity there than there is in Richmond. And in Richmond, they took me at my word. But where I live, dishonesty is often a way of life. And we have, I mentioned yesterday, we have fraudsters. And they're the most popular people in the party circuit, because they got away with it, or they didn't get away with it and they're out of prison now, so they're okay again. And they continue doing that. So there's a lot more suspicion of people. But that notwithstanding, whenever I went up to somebody, I didn't care what their ethnicity was, I didn't care what their culture was, I didn't care what their economic level was. It was that I have something in my head that I want to put on canvas because I cannot paint about other people's reality. It's a lie, and it's foolish for me to pretend that I can. And I think it's foolish of some other artists who try to do these lofty statements about other people as if they know what it's like. And so for you, you have this purity of expression when you're talking about yourself that I think when you talk about him or her or it, as long as you keep it only about you and only about your perception, that all of your work is going to be like these two are, where you just speak from the gut. You really speak from the gut, and that's a critical gift for an artist to have. In the first place, it's honest, and I want to see honest art. But in the second place, it's reaffirming to you, not as a person who has to go to that job, but as a person who makes art based on her perception of her reality in life. And these speak very, very nicely of your capacity to say things in paint. Thank you.
You talk to yourself too, like JT does when you're painting?
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, let's put this one right here and I'll move them around if we need to. Is it your easel that I messed up
Yes.
yesterday?
Yes.
Ah, well. Thank you for
Oh, you're
being
welcome.
kind about it.
Anytime.
Okay, so tell me a little bit, or tell us a little bit about them.
Okay. I'm multimedia. I
Mhm.
have trouble concentrating on one thing. I'm a Gemini, so I have two different, at least two. The top, the floral one is watercolor. The bottom is acrylic.
Mhm.
And then the left one is cold wax and oil.
Ah. And what's the motivation? You know, this is a floral reference.
Yes.
And
I'm very intuitive, so the painting talks to me as I'm doing it.
okay.
And I have a floral background, so flowers can be a thing for me.
Mhm.
I'm also, because I'm intuitive, I love abstracts. So everything I do, I'm not into hyperrealism for my own art. Everything just kind of flows. But my preference is to do abstracts all the time. It's just that abstracts a lot of people don't get them. So,
Sure.
but the bottom one is acrylic, and it's actually a seawall. I took a picture of a seawall and interpreted in non-traditional colors. Though you can see the rocks and the shapes underneath the paint.
Sure.
And the teal is the edge of the seawall with the texture. The top left one, the cold wax and oil, was a beautiful abstract. And after showing it, nobody got it, and I got mad and started to layer it and carve into it, and that's what came out.
Well, good for you. I had a piece that was 9 feet wide and that tall, and I made this intricate frame and had sculpted body parts and people who were missing limbs and legs about that big, and I put them on the top of columns, and it was all, done up with moldings and columns, and I had two paintings on either side. It was the beginning of the Iraq War, and one of the reasons that the casualty rate was as low as it was, we would actually have lost more soldiers in the Iraq War than we lost in Vietnam, except they learned how to deal with percussive injury. And what they were doing was they were taking off their skull, and if it was intact, they were freezing it, and if it was not intact, they made a silicone copy of it. And so they had these huge depressions in their head, and they walked around with them for months, years, until it was safe to close it back in, because typically the percussive damage would cause so much swelling in the brain that they died from their brain being strangled. And so on each side of this altarpiece, I had a soldier who had had their skulls removed. And in the center, I had a larger painting with a bunch of schmutz in it. And I was very, very pleased with it, because I thought it was a meaningful anti-war statement at the time. And I took it in, and my dealer reluctantly hung it. And we had the opening, and I said, okay, what do you think of it? And he just looked at it, and he said, I think it's self-indulgent. So when the show came down, I took that thing into my backyard and I smashed it into pieces, which was a really stupid thing to do, because someone wanted to write an article about me because of that painting. And I told them that I had destroyed it. And I really regret it. You know, it should have stood, and maybe it was self-indulgent. Maybe it was. Of course it was. You know, I was indulging my perception of what was wrong. But we have nerves on the outside of nerves in terms of our work. And when somebody doesn't respond, it can have a real impact on us. However, I think in this instance, you took whatever happened in your head and you did something with it that I would love to have seen the original, but I love seeing this, because there are these spines coming out of the ground. And by ground, I mean ground of the canvas. And there's a real intensity about it. It's direct and it's demanding, and it focuses my attention. And yet, there are these almost landscape references, because, you know, we see horizontality and we start going landscape. And yet, it's not in a place. It's in an ether of thought. And you've got color moving around in here in such a wonderful way. I don't know how much of what is what was first there and what was finally there, but it doesn't matter, because that's what's there now. And these bits of vibrant, bloody red
That was what was underneath.
are so raw and compelling. And then something is coming up out of them or going down into them. I can't tell which, but there's this rawness of emotion about it that is a wonderful document of an artist's experience, exactly like you were talking about. You know, you're a reactor unit, and You put something down and it tells you something else, and you follow that, and you follow that, and you follow that. And this isn't like following through to Narnia. You know, you go through this is going into some place outside reality where there's pure emotion and there's pure thought and there's pure reaction. And so I can sit with that and do it just like with the painting of the birds. I could sit with this painting and have it alone on a wall and have a different feelings and thought experience every day I sat with it. And to me, that's a very compelling piece of art. So I'm sorry that you went through that. I'm sorry that I went through that. I wish I had had your wisdom and had gone, okay, maybe it is self-indulgent. So how do I make it more honest? You know, less about me, and more about something else that's out there. This I love because you say you have a background in the floral industry, and so that's so much of what floats around in your head, because I've done a little reading about that, and that's a cutthroat industry, and the competitions are brutal. I mean, I don't know if y'all know about this, but you might look up floral competitions, Google it sometime. It's worse than dog shows, and those people are evil. you know, that yank them up by the tail, and God knows what they do. Someone just got kicked out of the American Kennel Club because he was a famous dog trainer. I just saw it in the news last night. Famous dog trainer.
I probably know him. I know seriously, I handled for 20 years.
Oh, well.
And I was a licensed vet tech.
You may. He works with German Shepherds. And they've kicked him out because they realized that he was abusing dogs so badly that one of them, they said in the story, looked like a bag of bones. He had brutalized that dog so badly. But that's nothing compared to what I've seen in floral competitions. And we have this image of, you know, FTD and everything, you know, you go, I want number 13, and that's certainly part of it. But if you were in that industry, you have a lot to say. And here, you give us a reference to flowers. To me, it's pretty obvious. And yet, you've got this splatter going on. And was your job stressful?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Everybody would say every day, oh, I wish I had your job. You're making pretty flowers.
Yeah. And so here you've taken beautiful colors. I won't use the word pretty because they're not pretty, they're beautiful. And there's a big difference between pretty and beautiful. Pretty is trivial. Beautiful is much more complicated. So you've taken, again with the church, you know, if you can block out in your mind these splatters, it becomes pretty. But then you've gone in, and whether you meant it or not, what to me comes out is, it's sort of a, oh, damn it. And, you know, to hell with the flowers. I want blue specks on top of my painting, is my take on it. I can see that this is about stress. And as beautiful as it is, I can sit with it and I can have a different experience with it at different times. This one, I would never have gotten a seawall, and I don't care. I don't care that I didn't get that it was a seawall, because what I saw was that you have taken color, and color composition is, to me, more important than geometric composition, you know, where the things go so that, you know, you end up with one of Da Vinci's pyramids or that kind of stuff. Your geometric composition is very, very limited. So the whole, you know, because these are really the only things where we can go into geometric. You know, you said this is the seawall and those are the stones. But you push that down far enough so that the color composition takes over, and you keep moving me down. This shoots me down, and however, I want to stop here on this red that you've got, and then this yellow pulls me back, and these jagged marks on the blue shoot me over here, and I sort of, when I get into that purple, and then I'm back up, because you've got on your strokes with acrylics especially, there will be a little bit of welling of color where thinner or medium is, and so there are these subtle lines within the strokes that carry me back up here and turn me down, and this brings me back this way, and I come down because there's almost a little stair step of subtle strokes that lead me back down into this, and this time this brings me up. However, cleverly, whether it was instinctual or not doesn't matter, there's this mark, this blue-green right here, and if it wasn't there, we'd shoot off the canvas. But what this does then is shoots me down into here. And so again, I have another route to move through the painting. So the color composition in this painting is what makes it work completely, because the geometrics would, by nature, throw us off the canvas or get us stuck where they are. You know, the edge of the seawall would throw us off the side or the bottom, and the rocks, we'd get stuck in the rocks. But you've used your instinct and your intuition and your practice of response to your own feelings and ideas to keep us moving around inside this canvas. And so I would submit that these colors come closer to being pretty colors than what happens here. And yet, the color composition that keeps us moving starts taking me out of the color and putting me into the movement. And I start wondering, okay, why did she move me from here to here? And why then does she want me to go over here? And looking at a painting is not about having answers. At its best, it's about having questions, more and more and more questions. And if I get an answer, the answer leads to another question, which leads to another question, and so on and so forth. And that's a successful painting. So I think you've taken, and again, I want to suggest, if you're a curious person, look up stress of floral competitions. I think that would be an adequate Google. Don't you think things would pop up? Because I've seen them on Google just by accident, which is why I knew about it. But look it up, because what has happened here is the prettiness of flowers in the competition is more about beauty. And that's why they're so cutthroat, at least in part. But it's still part of your experience. But you are so complicated because you know what really goes on. You know the stress of work. you know the stress of maintaining that work. And it comes across in this. Not that they're stressful paintings, not that there's a meanness about them, but that there is a complexity about them that is the truth of your career. They are pretty things. Flowers are pretty things. I love growing them just for that reason. And yet, they've become a thing of sadness for me now.
Oh.
Well, I can't garden anymore. My back is dissolving. So I can't get out there and do it. And my backyard now has a dead apple tree and 2 zinnias that came up, volunteers from last year. And that's the sum total of my gardening this year. So I have a little bit of melancholy about, now that I know what your career was, because it meant so much to me to have those things come up in my life. And yet, it's hard work, it's sweaty, it's difficult, and in Texas, it's not a climate that's conducive to that.
Oh, it's like being in a
So-
sauna.
Hmm?
It's like being in a sauna. Texas.
And an oven,
I don't know, you know,
when you want to cool off from the
with all your
summer.
friends.
But I really, really like these, and frankly, I covet this one, because I don't know what happened, I don't know why, but as an artist, you took and did what I should have done, and came up with something that's compellingly interesting. And I encourage you to let that part of yourself out anytime you care to. Don't force it, don't chase it, but it's a wonderful part of yourself. The stress of your career is a wonderful part of yourself for art. Thank you.
JT, when that person was going to write an article about your painting, they were no longer interested in an article about why you destroyed it. That would have been a very interesting article.
Well, we're still friends. And
He would tell me.
No, he's gonna do mine. Yeah.
And there's a biography that's.
You got two?
Yeah.
But that's not it. I've left that to her. If she wants to do something with it, I can.
On the bottom.
Oh, you thought you'd sneak in,
No,
huh?
I just tap down low like this. So, careful. No, this goes.
Going to two.
And then down on the top. On top. Lift that up. That part right there that goes up.
Yeah, let's lift the tray up a little bit if we can.
So bring this to me.
Do you know how?
It does adjust, I just,
How do we do that? Oh, 2 screws. 2 screws in the back, right?
no, it should.
2 screws back here and go up.
Mind your manners, don't talk.
That's it. 2 here. Oh, shit. Oh, that's even worse. Yeah, he doesn't have a
Do you know?
What time is it?
306.
3:06. Do you need a break?
Let's do.
Okay.
Let's take a break.